Oh, do you know what her name is? Her name is Icy Spoon.
It can't be.
It is. I
Oh
hate the South.
no. Icy Spoon.
Like I believe that somebody would be named that in West
Icy Spoon?
Virginia
Sure,
in the
yeah.
in the 30s, you know? Like
Welcome back to the Great American Movie Review, where we review great American movies.
my name's Mikiah.
My name is Kyle. Movie of the Week style podcast is what we're doing right now, where we take turns picking films and we talk about them. This week, I have selected the 1955 classic, The Night of the Hunter. It's a film that follows a serial killing preacher, gets word of some missing stolen cash, and has to hunt down the children who know of its whereabouts. The film was the first and only credited feature for Charles Laughton as a director. He was a well-known actor at the time, so that's why. But this movie itself was a commercial and critical disaster. It made it was a relatively cheap budget for the time, but the film never was received properly critically or commercially, and that's partly due to
Yeah.
yeah, that's due to its topic of religion, which was very controversial in the 50s.
Right. When you think about the other like religious themed movies in the 50s, you get like the 10 Commandments and Ben-Hur and all of these like religious epics that were remakes of silent films that were brought to like color and sound and big, epic fashion. And this one is a
Right.
movie that deals with religion in a very different way. And one that was
It actually shows like two sides of the same coin that is
right.
religion,
I think this
if you
movie in
will.
itself does that pretty well, like
Yeah.
presenting both sides of that coin.
So obviously, I picked this movie because we had a string of really good movies that one of us or both of us have seen before. So I wanted to pick the first movie that neither of us have seen going into it. I suppose Are You There, God It's Me, Margaret is much more of a newer film. However, you saw it in theaters and I hadn't seen it
Right.
before, so I just wanted to pick something that would be new for both
Yeah.
of us. And I also wanted to focus on something that was new for both of us and a director that neither of us know, writers that neither of us know, and also actors that I didn't know going into it, but you probably knew some of the heavy hitters like Robert Mitchum.
Yeah, from some other films, but I haven't honestly, I'm still trying to expand my knowledge of classic films. So I'm happy to keep going
Hmm.
back further and further in time. This is actually the first like golden age Hollywood movie that we've watched, which is interesting because it's the first one we've watched that's during that Hays Code period of time, which I don't know if you know what the Hays Code is.
Absolutely no idea. Oh no, wait, I've heard of it, but
Okay,
I don't know
so the
exactly
Hays
what it
Code,
is.
for those who don't know, it was a period of time from like the mid 30s to the late 60s where and the code basically prohibited for any movie to have profanity, suggestive nudity, graphic or realistic violence, sexual persuasions and rape. So it was just like a highly censored period of time within Hollywood, which is super interesting because this is when people like Hitchcock were like really making their biggest best films, and Orson Welles and all of these people, and they were working around these code restrictions during that period of time. And it's really interesting when you watch something like this, something that is truly dark, and still have it be influenced by the time in a way that I think allow like it's kind of that forced restrictions that I think a lot of filmmakers had in the time that kind of pushes creativity to a different place. And I think that's what happened. Not that I think the Hays Code was good. I think that art should be what it is and that the Hays Code is counterintuitive to that. However, during that time, so many people were able to, because of the restrictions, like creatively work around them in a way that made compelling and interesting films.
Yeah, you can definitely tell the few times that it shows violence, it shows at the start it shows a dead woman's body, and it shows even when Willa Harper, who is the mother of John and Pearl, is killed by Harry Powell. It's done so
Yep.
off camera, and the only thing it shows of like dead bodies is like I said before at the start, and then her body underneath the water, which is a very cool shot. I have no
So
idea how he did
before we
that.
go into it anymore,
Um,
because you're already going right there, I just want to say if this is the kind of movie where if you've never seen this movie, if you've never heard of this movie, and right now you're listening to us talk about it, absolutely seek this movie out and go and watch it. It is
oh,
great.
absolutely, yeah.
This is a tremendous, tremendous film, and it deserves to be watched. And we're going to talk about it fully, but it is a 68-year-old movie, and I don't expect everybody to have seen it. So,
No, yeah. Spoiler alert for a 68-year-old movie that nobody saw. So yeah, yeah,
yeah,
that's fair.
it's just yeah, this one like kind of like Network too, but this one has, I
Yep,
feel like, even less of a known quality to it, which we'll get into. But
that's true.
it, yeah, definitely seek it out if you're at all like a film person. This is a filmmaker's kind of movie. Yeah, so they're always, so yeah, it's interesting though looking at it coming out in the time period that it did because of the Hays Code stuff. And just kind of seeing, and especially like, so Charles Lawton was, I don't know everything that he did. He's obviously he's a famous actor. He had won an Academy Award before this movie ever came out and was nominated for a few others. He was a very well
Yeah,
loved actor, and he also directed stage stuff. I don't know anything about his stage stuff, kind of like I've said in the past. I'm not a stage nerd, I'm a film nerd. So uh but it is
yep,
kind of interesting that this movie, the way it is his sole directorial like feature credit. Like you said, there's the one other movie that he technically worked on in a directorial fashion, but
right.
only like, not, he didn't fully direct that movie. He came in and did parts of it. But yeah, it's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, just finishing up
and
whatever was left, I guess. That could mean
as an
anything.
uncredited, yeah, he was completion director, quote unquote, which I guess means that somebody
Right.
dropped out. He had to complete it. Yeah, which it his uncredited was The Man on the Eiffel Tower, which doesn't appear to be a very strong movie. So, and I wonder if because obviously if you're coming on for a completion director and it flops, but there's also your feature directorial debut is a flop as well. I wonder if that affected the fact that he didn't make any other uh, or he didn't direct another feature film.
Right. I mean, well, the thing that happened, so I don't know if you know this, but he had cancer at the time when he started
Oh,
making this movie. He was sick. So he died in 62, which, technically would have been enough time to make another film after this. However, if you're dealing with
he did.
cancer, probably
True.
not.
Yeah, he did die 7 years after this movie came out, but that's
Yeah.
typical. Cancer typically, for prognosis reasons, it's for 6 months, for a year, and then for 10 years.
Yeah.
So
So
it's
I would,
possible his prognosis was not good. Then again, we only knew so much about cancer at the time.
yeah, he probably would have directed more films. And based on this, they probably would have been great. If this is his feature debut from a
They
filmmaking
would have looked
perspective.
spectacular. I mean, this is one of the better looking movies that I've seen, given a debut for a director as well as 50s movie with relatively low budget. This is a
Oh, man.
fantastic looking movie.
This is one of the best examples of black and white filmmaking that
Right.
I've seen. It uses that chiaroscuro, the darks and the lights and the contrast and the shadows and everything just so perfectly. It
Hmm.
uses different filmmaking techniques. It uses a very much a silent film era style in terms of the way that the shots are composed and the way that the moments are set up. But then it also has this very German expressionist kind of flavor to it with, you get really interesting looking scenes where it's like exaggerated lighting. I think of the bedroom scene where
Yeah,
it's
the
like a
bedroom scene
temple
with
where,
Powell and
yes, when
Harper.
he kills her in that
Yep.
scene. But that whole scene is like,
He's looking up at the light as if God is talking to him.
yeah,
And then he closes the blinds to shut him off, and then goes to the bed. Yeah.
which apparently that scene's barely even a set. It's mostly a backdrop,
No.
because
Yeah.
that's a use of black and white, just understanding that really well, which is just great to see in this kind of movie. But yeah, I think that Charles Lawton, apparently he had a big, like he really studied filmmaking and really loved
It
that
shows.
earlier era of filmmaking, and he talks a lot, or at least he didn't talk in the special feature stuff that I watched for this. They talked a lot about how he would show like D.W. Griffith's films, which I don't know if you know who D.W.
I
Griffith is.
absolutely do not.
All right, a little bit of more film history. Like I said, this is a filmmaker's film for sure,
It
through
definitely
and
is.
through. And so D.W. Griffith is one of the most influential filmmakers ever in the history of film. Also, a giant racist, but
I
unfortunately,
assume it was the 30s and 40s, so yeah.
yeah, that's why he pioneered these. No, not even. He's before 30s and 40s. This is the
Oh,
late
then that make
1800s and early
oh, that makes a
1900s.
lot more sense then. Yeah.
So he directed the movie Birth of a Nation, which was
Yeah.
so influential in terms of the techniques that it brought to filmmaking. However,
Small tangent. Woodrow Wilson showed it at the White House, and that's why I hate him.
mm, basically anybody
That
who's going
kind
to
of
show this
sucks.
movie
That kind of
outside of a
sucks.
film class is, yeah, like I watched parts of this, but they didn't make us watch the whole movie because the racism is overt, and it's also like 4 hours long, and silent movies should never be 4 hours long.
Yeah.
I did watch like an hour and a half of another one of his movies, Intolerance, which is not as racist, but I don't know because I only saw an hour and a half of it, and once again, it's like 4 hours long. So,
He's at the end. He's just like, just kidding.
right, like I mean, like I said, there's sure to be plenty of racism in that movie based on Birth of a Nation. So it's hard for me to say, like, I wouldn't say that he's one of the all-time great filmmakers because great has too much of a positive connotation, and I am not willing to give that
Well,
man
if you,
something with such a
it's
positive
certainly some,
connotation.
it's certainly semantics. But if you argue, I would argue Napoleon Bonaparte was a great general, not just because of his technical prowess or tactics, but because of the fact that he did great things, which are just like huge, sweeping, consequential things. Not
Well, I mean,
necessarily.
that's where it's like it's monumental, but
It's
like I
monumental, yes.
I have a
That
hard
so
time. Yeah. So if somebody wants to call him one of the greatest filmmakers, I just can't go there. He's one of the most influential. He's a monumental filmmaker, but he is
so
not.
I guess as long as you do the
Yeah.
disclaimer of like how you would define great in this instance, sure, I think you could.
Yeah.
I think you
But
could. But yeah, he's certainly not a good director.
yes, not a good person. Tangent aside, like obviously he takes a lot of influence, and even like one of the main stars of that guy's of D.W. Griffith's films is Lillian Gish, who has a significant role in this movie.
Oh,
Actually, she
Rachel Cooper,
came,
yeah.
yeah, she came out of acting retirement from screen stuff and came back for this movie. So it's just kind of, it's interesting that he managed to get like that kind of little visual connection. And it's also interesting to think about how far film came so quickly as a medium
Yep.
from the, early 1900s to the 50s. It's not that big of a period of time, but it just evolved so much.
And also something as we're talking about monumental, but something as monumental as like Technicolor and The Wizard of Oz came 16 years before this. So even still, like technology was still moving forward, and it was moving forward exponentially. So and
Right.
it shows in some cases.
Yeah, and so yeah, a lot of people think about color filmmaking and stuff, and they obviously think of Wizard of Oz, but that came out in 1939. Color
Right.
filmmaking's been around for a long time. It's just filmmakers back then, black and white was the normal for a long time. Well, and color was mostly kind of relegated to musicals and comedies at the time. Like most musicals or comedies would be shot in color, but like dramas and other stuff, right? And color photography was a lot more expensive to produce as well. Yeah, it's just kind of, it's an interesting period of Hollywood. I'm really happy to look at something like this from that period of time that I've always wanted to watch, but I just haven't until now.
I didn't realize it until I saw this and looked at its contemporaries, but I have seen a decent number of 50s movies compared to what I thought I had. So
Oh yeah.
this is just more of the same because I watched the Al Capone from the 50s. I've watched The Day the Earth Stood Still, obviously 12 Angry Men, and now this. And that's just the ones that I can name off the top of my head. I've probably seen a handful more, but
Yeah.
um, I always find black and white films, obviously, you need a specific shot selection when it comes to what you're going to show on screen compared to color. And you also, it it's not so much you have to focus on the story a little bit more, or just a little bit more into the things that can't be, amplified by color. So you have to
Yeah.
lean on other areas of filmmaking in order to show what you're going to show. So I actually like black and white movies because of
Right.
that.
And in certain movies, like nowadays, it's obviously very rare to get a black and white movie. And sometimes I don't feel like it's justified. And sometimes I feel like it is. And
Schindler's
uh,
List comes to mind for me.
Schindler's List is a great example of something that totally justifies it.
Yep.
And then I think of something like Kenneth Branagh's Belfast from a couple years ago, like his childhood recreation kind of
Oh yeah.
movie. And it didn't need to be black and white, and it doesn't really feel like it should have been black and white. It's like that kind of thing. It's like some doing it for the sake of like some sort of nostalgic filter doesn't work, I don't think. If you're
And
really
unless you,
truly doing
again,
it.
as long as you focus on, if the story benefits from it, then sure. But I
Right.
haven't seen the movie that you're talking about from Kenneth Branagh, but I could absolutely believe that um, black and white can be absolutely detrimental to a story sometimes.
Yeah, it can be a crutch for sure.
Yeah.
Like if somebody's using it for the wrong reasons. Whereas I think, like I said, this film really understands everything. Like this is truly a black and white film using every element of it and understanding the history of filmmaking in a way to really amplify that and kind of tell this weird kind of horrifying fantasy because you
So
get
I did call it a horror based off the trailer, and I think I'm right.
watching the movie.
It is very psychologically horror based,
Well, when I think
it
about
appears
other
like
like
that.
50s movies like Hitchcock and stuff, this is right in the vein of those. It's
Right in
just
line, yeah.
horror. Yeah, horror wasn't exactly what it is now back then. It was,
No.
because people, and filmmaking wasn't at a place where like the sound effects and the visual effects and all of that stuff. It's not the same. It was never designed the same ways. But looking back and watching this movie, it feels like a horror movie through and through.
Yeah, I would say if you release this in theaters and a large amount of people watched it, I think they would consider it a horror.
This is, I think, one of the most suspenseful movies I've ever seen. Like it is up there, and as far
Most
as
certainly. I was very tense most of the time.
right, I like it
And
does a
I think that's
great
Robert
job.
Mitchum cuz
Well, yes, and with
yeah.
the filmmaking and Robert
Hmm.
Mitchum's great performance as Robert Mitchum is this preacher who
Yeah,
at the very
Harry
beginning,
Powell.
yeah, at the very beginning of the movie, it sets up the whole wolf in sheep's clothing Bible verse, and with some
Yeah,
just
beware of
yeah,
false shepherd that will try to lead lambs astray kind of thing,
which
which was
yeah,
very common in those days from the
right,
1900s to the 1950s.
and yeah, and immediately laying out like its religious themes right at the front of it.
We should say it is also set in the 30s Great Depression era.
Yes,
So,
it's set in Depression era, which for a lot of these filmmakers, that is when they were both making films and growing up in films, like
which
with
is why
films.
it's based on John and Pearl Harper's father killing two people and stealing from a bank $10,000 cash, that's got to be which is it's not an insignificant amount of money. So
No, for sure. And this movie, yeah, it really it sets it up really well with just immediately you understand because so you get the preacher character and he's in a whorehouse basically
he
or
is.
and he's watching
Yep.
a girl dance on stage and he just has this love tattooed on one hand and hate tattooed on the other.
LOVE and HATE on the other. Yeah,
Yeah.
on his left hand specifically, which I believe is important for religious reasons, left hand and
Yes.
right hand. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for teaching us how to spell.
Well, no, it's I mean, it's tattooed on his hand, but it's tattooed on his knuckles.
No, I
Or
know, I know, I know. I just
okay,
thought it was
calm
funny that
down.
you spelled it out.
I did spell it. Well, I was pointing to my fingers as I was doing it, so
Oh,
it was more
okay.
for me.
Well, we're not working in a visual
I'm a
medium
visual
here.
learner. Calm down, all right?
Well, yeah, so it has a really great, which this obviously there's a lot going on just in this scene alone because you get like he clenches his hand. He's
Yeah,
clearly furious about this woman dancing this way on stage so sinfully, and he puts his hand in his pocket and he has a
and
pocket
gets a
knife.
switchblade. I love how he does this multiple times. Whenever he's like tempted by something, he puts his hate hand
Mm-hmm.
in his pocket and flips the switchblade on so you can see it through the coat. It's kind of
Yes,
funny to me.
which
It's
that
funny to me when it happens later on. It's so that got a
apparently
laugh out of me.
apparently they originally wanted that to go through his pants, by like the where it's, the zipper is, but that got rejected because of the Hays
The
Code's
Hays Code,
restrictions, and it
I
being
could see that.
because they wanted it to be like it is like the sexual repression
Yeah,
there, like
it is lust essentially.
right, and just in coming up back in like a violent way. This is a clearly a violent man, and he's like, at that moment, he's like, Lord, don't make me do this here. There's so many people. Basically, like, I'm gonna go kill this woman on stage. And that's the real scary thing about this character is that he is not he's not this person he's not a grifter. He
No.
truly believes in the faith that he's telling, and he truly believes that these situations that he's putting himself in. So the movie kind of starts it off implying that he killed a widow and took her money basically that she had stored, and that
But he
was
says how many times has it been, Lord? Five,
right.
12? Like he even loses count for how many he's
Right.
killed.
Right. He's like, but the Lord always provides me with money.
Right.
And the money is from this person that he murdered and stole from. But
But
I,
you can definitely tell later on as well. He's not necessarily a grifter in that he believes what he's doing is right, but he's also very easily manipulative.
yes.
So he's very persuasive, and he uses religion as a weapon of
Yeah.
persuasion.
Because before he can kill that girl at that club, he gets arrested for the previous, not murder. I don't.
Carjacking.
Yeah, he got
Yeah.
arrested for stealing the car that he was taking,
Yep.
and so he gets arrested, put in prison. He ends up with the dad of, and so that's where he finds out that the kids, or that he stole a bunch of money and murdered, and he was getting electrocuted, and he's this is once again going into like the creepiness factor of like this man's true
Yeah.
conviction about what he believes about himself. And it's like, oh wow, the Lord gave me this information that there's this a widow and a bunch of cash. Wow,
Yeah.
this is the Lord's divine like putting this into my
I
life.
I don't remember if or I don't know if you remember, but the shot of like Mr. Harper, I think he like pulls down Harry Powell from like the top bunk,
Oh no,
but that
it's
shot
actually
was so funny.
oh it's even funnier because he doesn't pull him down.
He doesn't pull him down; he just falls down, and he's
Yeah,
like,
like
"You were quoting the scripture,"
no, Harper leans over and the
and then
guy
falls.
punches. No, he punches him.
He
He
punches
punches
him.
him right in the face, and he falls off the top bunk.
I don't know. I don't think they were intended to be funny, but man, that is
It
pure
was just,
comedy,
it
pure
was quite the
slapstick.
punch. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
quite the punch. I was like, what? It was just so sudden, but it's funny too because it's and a little almost disturbing in the way that he just rolls with it and gets up, like he's like unfazed by
right.
that,
Yeah, he's unfazed by it. Yeah,
because I think the opportunity has just completely blinded him to everything. He's just like, this is a perfect opportunity for me. Thank you, Lord, for putting this in my life. So yeah, and then he's only in prison for 30 days for the carjacking, so he just beelines it straight to the town. And all the townspeople, now this is set in, I think, West Virginia, but either way, very much Appalachian South,
that sounds
which
right. Yeah,
if it's just kind of where we are, like I'm a little bit even closer to that in the Chattanooga area, with
right.
right in the Appalachian Mountain region. And that's, you get a lot of those kind of, the southern setting is very important to the film and the way that the characters behave, and also the religious overtones of everything, because you
Yeah.
get,
So picture just north of the Bible Belt,
yeah,
pretty much.
yeah, because you get all these like townswomen and stuff gossiping about, because so Roger Mitchum's character Powell comes to town, and he's like making a big splash, as like this trip, as like this traveling preacher, just he's got this word that he wants to tell everybody. He's got his love hate hands and everything, and
His love hate hands.
that he uses to explain. And they're all just like fawning over him. And then, like, this woman's not been a widow for very long.
Theoretically, probably just a couple weeks max
Yeah.
before he enter. Yeah, before he enters the picture.
And all the
Um,
women in the town are like, oh, well, God didn't design, a woman to raise children on her own. You have to get married. And they're like really pushing her just immediately. They're like really insistent, which is
and Willa Harper agrees, but she's like, "Give me some time at least." Like,
right at
chill.
first. But then I think they kind of wear her down. And then he is charming at first.
Specifically, I know the son is named Walt Spoon, but Walt Spoon's mother, who is, man, she is something.
Walt Spoon.
Uh, Walt Spoon is it's the elderly gentleman who, essentially both of them are the people who persuade Willa.
Oh, yes, yes. The
I
older
I
couple
don't
that
I don't remember her name, but I know it's
yeah,
Walt's mother,
yes.
which is how I'm going to refer to her, as Walt's mother, because I don't know her name. Mrs. Spoon, whatever.
Mrs. Spoon.
Mrs. Spoon. By the way, I just love the acting from Ben. Like after he steals the $10,000, you can hear sirens in the background. He walks up to John and he's like, "Oh, where should I hide it? Should I dig and just bury it? Ah, no, no, they'll look for it." I just love the acting from that. It's so comical. It's so weird. It's
There's a lot of really interesting different types of acting in this movie, from the more subtle to the more like kind of like I'm reading these lines, like I'm chewing it up kind of stuff.
kind of bouncing around, but I remember when Mrs. Spoon calls for Walt and he's like washing a dish, and then like it's like Walt, and then he immediately drops it and goes like, "What's
Right.
wrong?" Like just she's just like trying to get his attention, just like a normal thing, and he just like drops it. He just drops it as if like his life depended on
Oh,
it.
do you know what her name is? Her name is
It's
Icy
stuff like that.
Spoon. It is. I hate the South.
It can't be. Oh no.
Like I believe that somebody
Icy
would be
Spoon.
named that in West Virginia in the 30s.
Icy Spoon?
Like,
Sure, yeah.
yeah, but so the general goings on of the film at this point are
I mean, the
so
uncle's name is Uncle Bertie Steptoe, so
I
yeah,
know
that's
all
the
these names are kind of
appellations.
crazy.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
appellations for you.
for sure. And so you get him, and he kind of ingratiates himself to Willa Harper, the mother of these children, and the father didn't tell his wife where the money was. He only told the kids and
Yep.
made them promise to not tell anybody. And
And of course, so he hid the money in Pearl's doll.
in Pearl's doll,
In Pearl's
which
doll.
yeah, which is a great reveal somewhere in the middle because you don't
It
know for
is
a while where the money is
because
until
she's
she like
yeah
spills it out on the
she spills it out
ground.
and she's just cutting it like it's arts and crafts, but these are like
Right, like
$100 bills. Because
yeah,
she doesn't know
she's like
what. Yeah, she's like 4 to 6 in that kind of age range. So yeah,
yeah, like she doesn't know, and she plays it very young. Well, I mean, obviously she's very young and she's playing at her own age, but um, no, like it's for children actors. You get her, Pearl, and then John. John is kind of your main character in
John
the
kind of is
movie.
the protagonist in a way.
Yeah, because that's part of the magic of the movie and the way it is able to build suspense is it's not like a lot of horror movies where it will have a child in it
Yeah.
as a point to be, like, oh, maybe the kid's in suspense. It is the whole movie.
Yep.
It is following the kids from their perspective as his father is taken to jail and executed, as his mother is taken advantage of by this clearly horrible man and that he sees to be horrible, and then he doesn't see her killed but he
No.
knows that he killed her,
I think
and it
yeah, eventually.
yeah, and it doesn't shy, like I like that it doesn't like try to make it like, oh, the kid obviously knows that, or the kid had to see his mother die, or he doesn't know. He's like the instincts of him being a child. He is more intuitive than people. Like I think this movie treats children with more respect than other movies do. Like
Which is
they
weird
are
because you like to
people.
see them die in movies. It's this must be very very awkward for you.
Interestingly, no kids do die in this movie, but the suspense was done so well, I wasn't sure in the middle part. I was like, he might die right now. Not like it made me forget about the Hays Code stuff, and that
Yeah,
they probably wouldn't
they
kill a
they
child on
probably
screen in
wouldn't in
this
the
way.
50s. That would yeah,
But
yeah.
it made me forget about that. It was so well done. I didn't know what was going to happen in the middle point of this film when he's like stalking them in the cellar and all that, and he's like got him pulled down, like he's up against the barrel and everything before Mrs. Spoon comes by with some food. I
Probably the
really was
most
like,
tense scene, yeah, because you obviously you know that the money's in the doll, and John is lying to him and uh, believing what he believes. Lying to an elder is punishable by death. Apparently,
yeah,
he absolutely would kill John in that instance.
yeah. And that's there's another that's a great shot in that scene of the stairwell,
The stairwell, yeah.
and just like that once again, that chiaroscuro, that really just dark, almost expressionistic look to it, really highlighting this like imposing nature of, yeah.
It's that the bedroom scene and the barn that make it look like there is nothing outside of the world that is this one room. That is
Right.
very cool to me.
Well, and there's also just like even the whole scene, so when the kids escape on the river, and it doesn't look real.
Yeah.
It looks like a fantasy kind of dream. And it kind of reinforces just this children's perspective on the situation. Everything is kind of bizarre and unfamiliar. This is not their home. This is not their town. They are drifting on the river, running away from this murderer.
Who's somehow keeping pace with them. Like obviously he just has to follow a river, but
Yeah.
like it's
He's
it's
riding a
that
horse.
style of horror movie. He's got time to sing. He's writing it very slowly.
Oh
He's
man,
just
that
chilling.
song.
That yeah,
That
that
song
that
is,
that hymn, this movie turns it into a death song. So
oh my gosh. That scene where they're in the barn
leaning,
and they wake up and
yeah, it's terrifying.
his silhouette
Yep.
on the horse in the distance while singing that song is like bone chilling.
Yep.
Absolutely. Just,
And what I like
yeah, it
is
is.
Rachel Cooper obviously knows he's a con man and he's just trying to get the money from the children. So he she's sitting out on the porch with a double barrel shotgun in hand, and you can hear him singing. And the shot of her like in the rocking chair, and then you see him out like on a stump just singing, and then they both sing, and then Ruby comes over. Ruby, one of the children, one of the foster
Right.
children, I guess, walks over with a lamp so it obscures him through the screen, and then as she turns back and the light goes away, he's gone. It's just a
Yeah.
really really cool
Uh
shot.
huh. Yeah. Oh, it's so good. And it's really, it's because of the Depression era setting. It has an interesting point throughout the movie of these kids that are just kind of roaming the street,
Yeah,
either parentless or runaways or whatever. However they ended up there, there's a lot of kids just
like
like come
they're
by.
going door to door for any kind of food. One woman gives them a potato each because she doesn't have enough to spare.
Yeah.
It's leaning on the poverty of the Depression era.
Right. Right.
Hey, there's that word
Yeah.
again, leaning.
Leaning. But yeah, and I think that going back to kind of the religious stuff in the film
Sure.
and his conviction on himself, when it's interesting because so they get married very quickly in the movie and they're on their honeymoon, and this
Which
also
it's important
goes,
to note that happened those days
right.
a lot more than today.
Yes, yes. Because of the societal expectations that you're not going to be a single mother.
Right. You kind of just have to settle up and pick who you're going to pick quickly because especially during times of poverty.
Right. So, yeah, you get that whole like they get married and skips over the wedding, goes straight to like they're in their hotel room kind of thing, and she's looking at herself in the mirror and kind of like touching herself up, her face, and just kind of seeing herself as an attractive woman, and expecting going into the bedroom and probably
Yes.
having sex because it's their honeymoon now, and
Consummating the
yeah,
marriage.
consummating the marriage. And also she seems slightly excited to do that. It's not like she's clearly not probably had a lot of sex lately. And as somebody who was married and had kids, obviously, and had a long standing marriage, have going without it for some time. Now she's back into a position where she is allowed to have it in that period of time.
And then Harry shuts that down real quick.
Really fast. Like he is immediately abusive
Yeah.
and using religion as the basis for that abuse, because he's like,
Like marriage is for childbearing. You don't want
yes,
to have any more children, do you? So we're not going to do anything.
right. And
Yeah.
it's that's the thing that's just disturbing about him. But that also just like psychologically messes with her head, because then she gets all messed up like, oh, I've been doing this wrong. Yeah, and so then you get like the scene where they're at the church and he's preaching on stage and she's up there with them and they're like
Yep.
yelling and all of this and telling everybody they're sinners and all of that, which is really hard to watch, especially living in the South. I grew up in church stuff, and my church stuff that I grew up in was never like that, but I've been exposed to plenty of it. And it's always disturbed me
What,
seeing,
you didn't have every single pastor teaching you what love and hate mean with their hands?
not well, not like that. But
Maybe in the Catholic Church.
I have seen like a lot of Pentecostal churches and stuff like that have these kinds of messages in the way that they get crowds riled up. And
Very cult like.
it's very cult like, and it's very disturbing. Just on its own it is. And watching it in the context of a movie like this, and it's really difficult because I do feel like these people come through like this character and manipulate and abuse the whole
It's
thing.
mostly mega churches though. Um, certainly.
I think
Looking at you, Joel.
I don't know. I feel like
Well, it's all
people
about the
who,
money, isn't it? He's all he wants is the $10,000. Then he can leave.
well, for him,
Then
yeah,
he's planning on to leave. Yeah, and I
can he
think
can keep spreading the good
that
word.
says a lot. Yep, and that way he can keep stealing money from widows. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's yeah, that's part of the horror of it though. Is just there is a reality to it, and think the movie
it's
represents
never been truer.
I think the movie represents that fairly, which is why for people to call it so objectionable at the time and even have it, I think it was banned in Memphis, and like some other cities and stuff from
Wouldn't surprise me.
even
Wouldn't
being
surprise me if
distributed.
most of the South banned it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it just didn't get distribution. The studio didn't really push for it because I don't think they really knew what they had. So the movie just
They
kind
also
of
probably
came and
didn't want
went.
to. They didn't want to have that fight.
Yeah, so like nobody saw it basically in the 50s. It just didn't get the kind of distribution. And like I said before, we don't have real records of the box office from that period of time. So it's you just
And
have to
even
go
if we
on.
did, I'd honestly take it with a grain of salt.
Oh, yeah, yeah, for sure.
At least in the film industry, not specifically, but there was definitely a lot of corruption when it came to
Oh,
bookkeeping, that kind of
oh
thing.
yeah, especially in like the
So,
studio system, because the golden era of
yep,
Hollywood is largely defined by the studio system. That was
yep.
these five studios were like the behemoths that were making pretty much all of the films.
And this is MGM, I believe.
Yes,
So
this was
MGM
MGM.
is the biggest
Yep.
at
Yeah,
the time.
MGM is definitely one of the big ones. One of those
Yep.
five. So it's just kind of, yeah, it's hard to look at it though and think about how I see these people that exist, and these people still exist, and these people can still manipulate. And like I said, I think the movie fairly represents an accurate representation of this, in that there are people who completely go along with this man up until the point, obviously, where they have the truth set in front of them that he is a murderer and all of this, and he's been tricking people. But it also has like the Gish character, the Mrs. Cooper, and she's taking
Oh
in
yeah.
orphans, and she is still insisting that, she insists that they learn the Bible, and she takes them to church and all of that stuff.
Well, it's more
But
so. It's more so. I'd say the most benefit you can get from the Bible is stories of telling you not to be, an asshole.
yeah,
So, and she's kind of doing that. So, yeah,
yeah,
it's the other side of the coin when it comes to it's thinking about religion and interpreting religion in a different way from the same material.
yeah, for the
So,
representation of the time, she was kind of
absolutely.
what religion
She's
should be for
yeah.
people. And even though she gives spankings and all of that, and she's very strict, but she still represents that in a positive way of what
Yeah.
religion is supposed to be. And then you get obviously the Mitchum character being the exact opposite of that. And
And obviously,
also,
reality was a little bit in between both of those things at
yeah.
the time, and
And
probably still now.
yeah. And you also get like the Mrs. Cooper character understands immediately that this man is not who he says he is. He is a
Yep.
liar. He is a thief. He has come to destroy.
Well, and
And
it's possible, of course, she's a foster. She's probably seen bad actors uh, trying to exploit kids in
yeah,
or previously. So it makes sense. She would be able to spot
for
that.
sure. And it's also it's kind of disheartening because I do feel like most people feel like they're more of a Mrs. Cooper within the
Hmm.
religious circles when I think that the majority of people are actually Mrs. Spoons.
Absolutely. Um, Man, yeah, growing up in the South, Mrs. Spoon, Icy Spoon, yeah, she absolutely represents most of.
Yeah, she's the majority, and I think that crowd at the end kind of represents that too. That kind of vitriolic rage that kind of comes about from that, both justified and not. And I think I think most of those people would definitely think that they're a Mrs. Cooper, but they're not.
No. And at that point, it's all about knowledge, because um, and manipulation at a certain point, because Powell was so persuasive. He
Right.
gets everyone on his side, even though he really shouldn't have anybody on his side. So, if given no new knowledge, then of course the spoons of the world will still be where they are. What I
Right.
like is how Walt is kind of like, he's a little bit iffy on him, but obviously he listens to his mother at the end.
Well, once
At the end of the day.
once he comes in and he's like telling his tale about how she ran away and when
Yeah,
he actually drowned her in the lake, which is a beautiful shot.
it's an amazing
Something
shot.
you would not expect that from a movie from this time because it's
No,
underwater photography and it's so crisp and clear and it looks so good. It's a very haunting image.
it's
But
also haunting because of what Uncle Bertie sees, and obviously he thinks rightly that the town, if they find out that she was drowned in the lake, they'll probably point to the person who lives closest to the lake, so Uncle Bertie. So,
right.
and that's a terrifying thought.
Yeah, Uncle Bertie is
Nothing ever kind of comes from that, but yeah,
yeah, Uncle Bertie's unfortunately the worst kind of drunk uncle in
yeah,
that he is completely useless to children who are fleeing for their lives in the moment that they
yep,
need him most. it's
yep,
that's another thing that really just adds to the suspense of it all. Just these kids are run once they actually get out of the house and they're running and they go straight to Uncle Bertie because they know that he's like the one safe place in the whole town.
yeah.
And
It's the one person who will listen to them and who hasn't
right,
been persuaded or manipulated by Powell. So
right,
yeah,
but he's useless because his own sorrows have overwhelmed him in his life and because he has his wife that died in the past and
yep.
he's just completely drunk and the kids have to just keep running.
Like you said, useless. Yeah, they're like wounded animals. They're going to a familiar spot, and that familiar spot is useless to them. So,
Yeah.
and then that's when they find the boat and go down the river.
Yeah, which is kind of the second half of the movie. The first half's all
It
of
is the
the
second half of the movie. Yep.
yeah, the first half's all of that just really great.
It's all between Harry, Willa, and the kids, and then the second half is Rachel and the children.
Yeah, and he just kind of reveals himself more and more to the kids in the first half while still
Hmm.
trying to hide himself his true nature from
Well,
the
what's weird
adults.
is he immediately, like, the some of the first words he says to Willa and the picnic is, "So he didn't tell you about the money."
Right.
Like he even is like coming like straightforward and trying to get exactly what he's trying to get at. There's no, and especially when he's trying to get out of the children, yeah, absolutely. He just goes straight into it.
And it comes down to the absolute firm belief that he believes what he's doing is good and correct.
Yep.
And yeah,
Which I don't know if I brought up, but I suspect that Harry Powell is absolutely schizophrenic, or at least some sort of psychotic mental disorder.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's clearly under this delusion
Yeah,
for sure.
because we kind of get the feeling that he hears voices that he interprets as God. Um, but we aren't shown that he hears them. We just have to assume,
Yeah, I don't think
which
in the
I heavily
50s.
assume.
Yeah, in the 50s they didn't know as much as they do today about mental health stuff. And so whenever movies
No,
do try to heads on to address it, it doesn't necessarily feel that great watching those
like
back today. So I appreciate that this
bipolar
movie.
disorder, borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, all those things were kind of thrown into the blanket statement of manic depression at the time,
Yeah,
and
and
they were up until like the 80s and 90s. So
yeah, so mental health stuff it's kind of, you're not gonna get the best representations of it, which is why I appreciate this movie. You understand that there's something wrong with this guy,
yeah,
but the movie never tries to explain it. That's one of my problems with like
it's
Psycho.
purely a
And
theory from me.
yeah,
I'm
some
not saying that the film outright shows it.
yeah. Yeah, it's just one of those things that I have an issue with in something like Psycho, where they do try to explain it, and it's like, oh, that explanation doesn't super hold up to the extent that
No,
I'd like it to. It's not as watertight as you maybe thought it was back in the day.
but Psycho is also, what is Psycho, the 60s?
It's 1960,
Not, yeah, 1960s. So
same
yeah,
era,
yeah, they still wouldn't have like known what to call it
right?
at the time.
So yeah,
And also it changes day to day, mental health.
oh
So
yeah. I mean, I'm
it's very
ADD, but
difficult.
now it's technically ADHD without
ADHD.
hyperactivity, and I'm like, what do you think the lack of H was for?
There's a comedian that says ADD is something that you diagnose yourself, and ADHD is something that you get from a doctor. Yeah, you got to go to the hospital to earn that H. That's what I've heard from a
Well,
comedian.
technically now though, like they changed
They are
it.
different things.
So, well, ADD was an official classification of
Hmm.
basically ADHD without hyperactivity, but now they just reclassified it as ADHD without hyperactivity as its name. And I'm like, well, that's, we kind of understood that before. I don't know why you did that.
I don't know what else you want to talk about when it comes to this movie. Oh, you talked about the cultural reevaluation. I don't know if you want to go over that.
Oh yeah, yeah. Let me pull up the. Yeah, so like we were saying, this movie just kind of came and went at the time when it came out. But the if you've heard of this movie, which you may not have if you're listening to this, but this has kind of become a very significant movie within filmmaking circles because as film criticism rose and after we moved out of the Hays Code era, you got a kind of a reevaluation of this movie that happened in the 70s, and people started to look back on it and reference it. And then even in 1992 it eventually got added into the National Film Registry, which, if you don't know what the National Film Registry is,
I don't, so yeah, just go ahead and explain that.
so basically, to get added into the National Film Registry, a film must be at least 10 years old and be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. And so of the movies that we've talked about so
Is there a
far
reason to do that?
on,
Is there
it's, so what they do, it's literally it takes the film and stores it in the
in the
National
National
Library,
Archives? Cool.
like in the National Archives, yeah.
Oh, cool.
So it's like a way of preserving the film as a piece of American history,
I guess it
basically.
would be the National Archives or the Library of Congress. I have to imagine National
Hmm.
Archives.
Yeah. So it's basically like it's just a way of preserving the film as like an important piece of
That's
American
cool.
history. And so of the movies that we've talked about, the only other movie that's been put in there was Network.
Really?
And yep.
Wow.
So,
I
but
guess I'm not
it's
surprised because
interesting.
we've only gone over recent movies necessarily.
Yeah.
Untouchables, Network, and this one are the
I think
oldest
they
ones.
add like 10 or 15 a year, and those
That's not.
movies can
That
be
sounds like a
from,
good amount. Yeah.
yeah, and those movies can be from any period of time, and the only rule, like I said, is they have to be 10 years
Yeah, it
old.
sounds like a fair amount to do 10 to 15. You don't want too
So,
many, and you also don't want it to become like a Hall of Fame style
yeah.
thing where you only put in the best of the best for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah. So interestingly, which we can cut this out. I just want to bring this
No,
up.
no, no. I think it's
But
interesting to
there's
bring up.
there's three superhero movies in the
Oh
National
no.
Archive. Can you guess what those are?
Um,
One of them just got added last year.
one of them just got added last year.
Yep.
Avengers.
No.
Oh, probably too new, even though it's 11 years old. God, Avengers is 11 years old. We are old. Um, first Spider-Man, maybe.
Nope.
I know, Blade Trinity. No, I'm kidding. Let's see. Three superhero movies. So,
Okay,
is
one's
one of
from
them
the
like
70s.
like the Incredible Hulk with Lou Ferrigno?
And the show? No.
Oh, the show. That's right. I don't know what I'm thinking of.
No, one of these movies is from the 70s, and the other two are actually both from the same year in the 2000s.
In the 2000s,
Yep.
is The Dark Knight one of them?
The Dark Knight.
It would be from the same year, so 2008. I know 2007 was Spider-Man 3. Obviously, that's the best of the trilogy. I actually think that one's underrated, but whatever. Um, we could talk about that later when you probably pick a Sam Raimi movie like Spider-Man 3 for some reason. Let's see. 2008. Iron Man?
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Iron
thinking.
Man just got added last year.
I mean, it makes sense if it's starting
It
something as
does.
culturally important as the MCU.
Yep.
Well, while it still is culturally significant, it may not be in a few
I
years.
mean, it's defined basically 2 decades,
Yeah, it
you
pretty
know,
much has.
which is crazy. But
Well, a
I mean,
decade and a half.
that's more than
The better
enough
part
to
of 2 decades.
justify that. The third one, if you aren't gonna guess it, is the original
70s?
Superman. Yeah,
Oh,
the
the
original
original
Superman.
Superman. That makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, but those are the only three in the national,
Are you sure it's not
the
Superman 4,
National
The
Film
Quest for
Registry.
Peace?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Be real cool if they did.
Yeah, National Film Registry. It's just an interesting thing that exists, and I love that it exists. And there's a wide range of types of movies that are in there. There are short films. There are
Given
you
the
know
internet, I don't think
blockbusters.
any newer movies are going to be like scrubbed from existence. And it's kind of, it's kind of arrogant to think like the National Archives is like, okay, and the eventual like heat death of most of the universe except for this one building, we got it covered. I think Washington D.C. in a war or something like that is probably the first to go. So I don't know that
I
how
just I think it's more of a
it's more of a
it's more of a
statement.
symbolic
Yeah, it's a
thing. Yeah,
statement type of thing. But
it's a statement, but I do think that because of the
it's pretentious.
exclusivity of it, well, it's done. Like it's a whole. I think it's interesting, and I do think it's
It's
significant when a
interesting.
movie gets added to it.
It's a little pretentious though. It's fine. It's fine. Pretentiousness is okay.
Either way, yeah, this it is though a good representation of the fact that this movie in its lifetime, it took until 92 before it did get added, but
Yeah.
that's because it went for almost 20 years without anybody really talking about it in a real way that was significant, which is just kind of an interesting thing for a movie like this, especially as good as it is.
Yeah, or how controversial it is. Like
Right.
I would feel like in some circles people would want to watch this just because of its uh controversies surrounding it.
Apparently they tried once it started getting controversial reception in by the public. They tried to use that as promotional stuff, but the studio shut that down, which is
Yeah.
really dumb.
Like I said, they
Obviously
don't
you
want to
should
fight
have
that
done
fight.
that. Yeah.
It was
Now,
back in the
yeah.
50s. Obviously, nowadays they can fight that fight and they'll still have, as long as they produce good movies, that's all that really is going to make bucks
Right.
nowadays at least. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it's just kind of interesting to look back and see how it managed to it did, I think, just because the quality of the film, it managed to still be found.
Yeah, if this was a bad movie, it would just be lost to time.
Yeah, completely. So yeah, and it's interesting in the filmmaking of this too, the way that Lawton kind of went about making the movie. He had a lot of being a first time director, he wasn't, I guess, burdened as much by the way that things were, and having been in the industry for a long time, he got to kind of, because apparently he directed this without ending cues, kind of like they did in old like silent film era. So he
Oh,
filmed it
interesting.
like a silent film in terms of its like the way he queued up scenes and cut scenes. He just
Yeah.
let the thing run for 10 minutes, like the reel would run for 10 minutes until it ran out.
Yeah, and he'll chop it up and edit it the way he needs
Yep.
to. That's kind of nice.
Yep. Yeah, and also he had the composer for the movie on set the whole time. And the composer
Yep,
was
that's
like,
smart
yeah, helping with
because
the cues and everything.
I didn't realize how familiar the score is in some cases, but I think it's just that I would call it derivative nowadays, but it's probably pretty high up there when it's with its contemporaries when it comes to score that I've seen.
Oh yeah, I
It's
mean it
very
works.
memorable in
Yeah,
spots.
and it really accentuates all of the suspense of the movie
Yep,
too, especially as it goes on.
because it's that very thriller esque. You can you can hear every single instrument that shows suspense, like brass section.
Yeah,
You can hear it when it's needed. So
yeah, because pretty much every time with the movie, the composer, even back then, was shown the movie after completion
right,
and put the music to it after it was completed based on the movie, how it's edited and shot and everything. So having them on set while you're filming and
that's
having
smart.
like musical input in the moment, that's great. Like that's so interesting. Like it's not even something that I would necessarily want to do as, if I were making a movie, but it's just kind of like it's a fascinating approach and I think it
It's
really
the
paid
reason
off.
why I think we need to focus more so when it comes to new directors, because new directors will always pioneer something. Well, they won't always, but it's it's always good to have them because they will find a way to pioneer some new thing that changes the industry eventually. So I have a feeling, because there are going to be more directors who were streamers and that kind of thing, and because the tools that we have, uh, either content creators on YouTube, which I wouldn't exactly call us content creators right now, but something like a content creator or something like a streamer would have more tools. Like OBS is absolutely something that can be very useful when making a movie, because as you're
Right.
recording something, the second you stop recording, you can immediately view it, which is something that you can't always do for film.
No,
So,
especially back then, you
especially
couldn't
back
do that
then,
at all.
you couldn't do that. Yeah, you couldn't do
It
that at
was
all.
harder. Yeah, within a studio system. I mean, that's why the studio system became so significant, especially when sound got implemented, because you had to be able to listen back to these things, and you couldn't do that in like a typical environment. You had to have that set up, to be able to go back and look at dailies.
Yeah, if you're trying to make a movie like the way that you envision it, it was hard to do it back then. It's a lot easier to do that now. You had to have so many things going your way, correctly, and so many things out of your control to like make things look the way you want it to look. But
Yeah,
it's never been easier. So
yeah. Well, you have any final thoughts on the movie itself before we move into scoring?
absolutely not. I want to talk about the scoring.
All right. Well, interestingly, I have a different approach to how I'm going to do scoring this time. And that I'm going to tell you up front what I think this movie is out of 20.
Okay.
And then we can go through it from there if you want.
I don't think I'm going
But
to do
I,
that just yet because I haven't fully thought out what
mhm,
I think about certain parts of this movie in order to give it.
yeah, this one I feel very confidently about. And like I said, we've been watching a lot of
Of good
great
movies. Yeah,
movies. Like, not just good, we've been watching great
that's
movies.
true. And yeah,
like,
great
and
movies.
this continues that. This one is another one of the all timers. Like I said at the beginning of this, if you haven't seen it, go and seek it out. It is
Absolutely.
fantastic. It is worth your time. That being said, I think okay. I'm between, which this is going to be really high, a 19 or a 20. I
Interesting.
haven't fully decided yet on if the impact can is a 2 or a 1.
So,
But otherwise, our categories are writing, world building, characters, directing, acting, visuals, editing, sound, and I put in the alternative category that rotates every time as suspense.
suspense is a good one. I think the only other one would have been noir. It kind of is, but I also would have called it a period piece over anything else. Suspense or horror is what I would call it because it utilizes
Right.
techniques that I would consider both of those things very strongly.
Yeah.
So,
Kind of, yeah. The alternate category usually refers to in some way its genre.
right. Yeah, so we can start with writing. I'll let you start this one.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like everything in this movie is just extremely well done. It's the writing of just like this thematic material that's very dark and hard to deal with thematic material is just kind of perfectly used throughout the movie. It's very 1950s still, like in its performances and everything, but you know, that has its own sensibilities to it. And, the more you kind of know about the 1950s movies, I like, whenever I watch a movie, I make a list of every movie I've seen from that year and I put it in that list just to kind of look at all of these movies that came out next to each other, just to kind of give me that context. And it's always kind of good for my brain to like get that, because it kind of is like, okay, comparatively, this versus that. And yeah, it's hard for me if you have something more specific to say about the writing. Like I said, all of these categories to me are twos all the way
So
down until I'm bad.
I don't quite know how to compare it to what I consider great writing or great for the time, but I think writing is one of the weaker aspects when it comes to this because of um how kind of simplistic it is. The dialogue can be sometimes a little bit too weird for me, like like I said before, the Ben Harper thing. The acting is makes it kind of awkward and kind of funny, but if you go back, the dialogue is kind of weird. And I don't know if
That's
they're
very
trying.
much
I don't know if they're trying to portray the 30s as a simple times, which it definitely was simpler times. But I don't know. I don't know how to take that as whether it was intentional or whether it was just simplistic writing because it's simplistic writing. So I don't know how to differentiate the two. I wouldn't call this
yeah.
great writing. That's what I would say. Whether that's intentional or not is up for debate. That's what I would say.
I mean, I think it implements its themes really well, and for the it's in the time that it was made.
The themes are good.
It's
The
really putting it
dialogue
in
and the story
context,
are
though.
much poorer. So I would still consider this a one, strong one, but a one.
Okay. I mean, like I said, I laid out at the beginning, but I will acquiesce to your one here.
I think it's just because just going based off themes or just going based off of execution of those themes, I don't think that gives it a two. And I'm gonna be honest when it comes to most of the plot, it's very forgettable. And I think the reason why the story benefits because it's a beautiful looking movie. I think if this was just a regular looking movie, its story wouldn't be as highly acclaimed. That's me
Well, there's
personally.
always the three movies, like I said in the past. There's the one that's written, the one that's filmed, and the one that's edited.
Right.
And in this case, I mean, I think that it's, once again,
But
it's
I think
hard.
all three have an overlap.
Yes, I think that it's hard to isolate this when you think about it in context of movies that it came out around
Right.
versus all movies ever,
Which,
and
and
the
I'll be honest,
evolution of
I've only
writing.
seen all timers when it comes to 50s movies. I've only seen very, very well acted or very, very well written movies from the 50s anyway. So I think it's because of the fact that that is my baseline for what I think when I think of 50s movie. It's tough for me.
Okay, like I said, I'll acquiesce to your one if you feel strongly about it.
I
But
when it comes to the
I just
writing,
can,
it's
yeah,
one of the ones that I feel more strongly about it being a weaker aspect of the movie. Not
yeah,
necessarily its weakest, definitely not its strongest.
that's fine.
Yeah.
All right, world building.
World building, I'm more than fine putting a two because of the fact that it shows the way that that each character, specifically, and how the story itself reacts to the world of religion and the world of
Yeah,
poverty in the 1930s. That is
yes,
a much stronger point when it comes to the writing overall, is the world building, characters, and that kind of thing. So
yeah, and the
yeah,
way that the kind of expressionistic elements really complement that too, and within the world of the children's perspective and everything, I think that just it handles all of that very well.
and I think what the movie chooses to show also affects a little bit of world building. So cinematography, it obviously isn't like the world itself, but it like what you show on screen shows the world. So I'd say that benefits it as well.
Yeah,
Characters, you can go.
characters, I feel pretty strongly about it being a two. I think you get a cast of very memorable characters that represent very diverse things within the context of this kind of story. Robert Mitchum's preacher character is one of the more horrifying villains in any movie that I've seen.
Yep.
And you get Shelley Winters's mother character, and in contrast to, you know, the Mrs. Cooper character later in the movie, who is also of just a fantastic character. Like, that character, when she shows up, is such a relief. And because you can tell
When
she's
she's
actually
defending the
gets it.
children, it's one of the most heartwarming things I've seen.
Oh yeah, this movie earns its happy ending. A
Yeah.
lot of movies at this period of time will have a happy ending that feels kind of tacked on and whatever. This movie, it earns it, and you want that happy ending
Yeah.
by the end of it. So I would definitely say for me, characters are it too.
Yeah.
Even the children are so well characterized, you know.
Well, they're children, and you have to take that into account when talking about characters that are children. Obviously, they're not going to be that complex, or when if they're going to be complex, it's going to be because children have an unbelievable imagination and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they also don't have enough of a grasp on certain things that adults do. Like we can talk about John and Pearl are coming back from the hangman, and Pearl is singing the hangman song about his father
Right.
or about her father, because she just knows it to be a catchy song, not necessarily what it means.
Yeah.
So that
And
kind of
John
thing.
as a character just really represents, I think, just the resilience of kids, which
Yep.
Mrs. Cooper hits very on the nose at the end of the movie, but I feel like that was
It's like an
appropriately
innocence,
done.
but using innocence as a strength, as if
Yes.
yeah, as if like children don't really have hate in their hearts for the most part because of the fact that they haven't been exposed to the world, and when they are,
Yeah.
they kind of resist it because that's not something that they understand.
Like, I feel like uh, an adult in the same situation would have been broken by
Yeah.
it, you know, but a kid is able to survive it and move on from it. I think
Yep.
that's kind of the point at the end of the movie that she's making. And I think that he embodies that really well
Because let's be
in
honest,
that
children don't
character.
know what failure is, or like they kind of push through failure because they only know what it means, like to they're ignorant to the consequences of failure. So
Right.
they won't be broken by it because they haven't experienced it, which I think is a
Yeah.
strength.
All right.
Directing, I can start with this one. Easily one of the
Okay.
best directed movies for a debut.
Absolutely.
I think, like I have said before and many times, this is one of the most beautiful movies I've seen. Um, and the all the characters are fantastically done when it comes to what Charles Lawton showed in the making of this movie. It's just good. It's just
Yeah,
good
I
stuff.
think Lawton, it's a tragedy that he was never able to direct another film
Yeah.
because this is incredible. And I think that he really is somebody who understood filmmaking and its past and its history well enough to actually be able to push it forward. And maybe it would have been pushed forward differently because of his influence if he was able to make more films that got, you know, more significant attention. But because this is his only film and it got just buried in the way that it did, you know, I don't think he was able to do that.
Yeah.
But I think that this is one of, if not the very best directorial debut I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It is just
It's super strong,
astoundingly well done. Yep.
especially when in the context of this is his only movie. Yeah.
Right.
This is strong. Uh so for acting, I would still say a 2. Some of the things are weird. Some of the lines from John are weird. Some of the lines from obviously Ben Harper's character is super weirdly acted, but um
It
I think it's overblown, or it's the tidal wave that is Robert Mitchum, Harry Powell, and I'm forgetting her name, Shelley Winters, who is Willa Harper, and Lillian Gish, as you've said before. The three of those actors do an amazing job.
yeah.
So I can't give this less than a 2.
Yeah. And I think that the acting really highlights to me kind of the world that they're creating and that exists here is kind of like the dark side of something like the Andy Griffith Show, you know,
Yeah,
which that show came out in 1960. And what everything that show represents, represents like the dark corners of that, I think.
right.
And I think some of those that stylistic acting though that is more like chewing it up versus the more nuanced acting being in the same film, sometimes characters interacting with each other with different styles of performances works really well to this movie's effect.
Right.
Visuals, I think we're both agreement as a
Yeah.
2.
As I've said before, it's a beautiful
We've
movie.
talked a lot
Blah blah
about
blah
that.
blah blah. Yeah, etc. Yeah, it is
Editing
a
is
beautiful
also
movie.
fantastic.
Yep.
Just,
Given the time, given what they had to sift through in order to get this, and they got it. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely a two.
absolutely. Sound. I think sound is really fantastic in this too because it doesn't play like a traditional talkie from the
No,
time period. He really manages to achieve this kind of silent film aesthetic to the presentation, and it holds on. I think of the moment when he's chasing them and they're at the boat and he kind of falls into like the boggish kind of water,
he
like
does. Yep.
the brackish water before he can get to the boat, and they are drifting away and he just screams, and it's just like the horror of it. You hear like the distance of his voice as he's singing in the movie multiple times. It has a really unique soundscape, and we already mentioned the score being really memorable as
The
well.
score is very memorable for the time. I was surprised by that, and I think that
Yeah,
sound and suspense go kind of hand in hand for me because of the fact that so when it comes to suspense or when it comes to the emotions that I'm supposed to be feeling, I will always say that score and sound really affect what I'm feeling.
yeah,
The emotions that people feel, um, and I think because not just because of the sound, but because of the shot choices, that kind of thing, the acting, everything like that. I think the suspense holds. It is a terrifying movie in parts
yeah, yeah.
for
Really,
no
I
other
really do
reason
think so
than
too.
everything going correct.
Yeah,
For that, yeah, I would
yeah,
put it two as well for suspense.
yeah, and especially with the thematic material that they're working on, that really just elevates it to a different level too.
Yep.
The real feeling of it, tapping into our collective fears as people, and especially as people in America, it really works for that.
Yeah.
So Impact, I'm gonna lay out what I think about Impact, and you can tell me whether or not you think it's a 1 or a 2.
Okay.
Because I don't, it's definitely not a 0 because this movie has survived the test of time. It is in the National Film Registry. It's been, but it has kind of this interesting history, and I don't think the movie's actually been as impactful on the industry itself as it could have been because of the way it got buried for 2 decades basically before it had this reevaluation that happened in the 70s.
Yeah.
And because of that, I still don't think this movie quite gets the representation that it should get because of that. That being said, this movie does have, like, it's a filmmaker's film, like I said,
It's
and
got a decent following for a 50s movie because not a lot of people
right,
nowadays especially watch 50s movies or golden age movies because of the campiness that comes with it, or like because of the Hays Code that you said before. It's just a different viewing experience, whether that be better or worse, mostly worse, but
yeah,
or it's not so much worse or better, it's more so limiting in the scope of what you can film in those times. So it's understandably it's got a following for good reason because it's a controversial film that probably helped it nowadays than it did beforehand. I think
right.
if it's not a controversial film, it'll do better earlier. It won't do better later, I imagine. And it would have been buried if it was a bad movie. So I
Yeah,
think because it's such a good movie and because it's so controversial, its impact is a lot better than it could have been, or it's a lot
it's
better. It's
controversial.
a lot better than a lot of 50s movies, I'd say.
Yeah, it's
Somehow.
controversial in the way that makes it a classic,
Right.
basically.
Yeah.
Like not in the way
Because it's
that
so
kind of
different.
taints. Yeah, it doesn't
Because
taint
it's
its
so different
reputation.
than other 50s movies or other golden age movies. It's different and that's better for it. But it's also outside it's tough for me because I actually am
Yeah,
leaning towards it too because of that, because it had so many hurdles to jump through. But if I'm being honest to what we've called impact in the past, it's for me, it's accolades, impact nowadays and before, which also means critically and commercially. So it's kind of like three different aspects. accolades or critical success, commercial success, and whether it's important nowadays.
Yeah.
So for me, I think it just gets a one
Yeah,
because of
I
that.
think so too, because I think that this movie could have been a huge deal, but because of the way it got buried for so long, it wasn't able to have a direct impact in the way that it could have had. And now at this point, it was too late for it to really, ever have that in the way that like I said, it could have, but it still has managed to reach into some sort of cultural element, especially within film circles, but never quite on a wider scale than that.
Right.
And yeah, like we said, because it got buried when it came out, it didn't get any recognition from any kind of
It
awards
also felt
bodies,
like
which,
nobody fought for it. So
right, as much as awards bodies, like we've always said, they're kind of pageant shows basically
they're
and
pageant and
popularity
they're very
contests.
arbitrary in most
Yes,
cases.
but they do bring a certain elevation or certain recognition to movies that would have otherwise been lost,
Right.
are recognized and sought out because of those accolades. So it's just kind of an interesting thing to look at with it. But yeah, I agree. I think that this is a one. Still impactful because it did manage to come back around, but not a full two.
Yeah. It's also even though it's still relatively unknown compared to other 50s movies nowadays, but it's done a lot better than what you would think it should have. So yeah,
That brings our final score for The Night of the Hunter to be
18 out of
an
20,
18 out of 20,
9 out of
which,
10.
yeah, I mean, that's a great score.
That is a fantastic score.
And once again, it represents.
I will always say that if you're going out of 10, each if you're going out of 10 specifically, each point up does affect how it should be viewed for by us, even though this is a casual scoring system. But if it's considered an 8 to 10 out of 10, I'd say those are fantastic movies regardless.
Absolutely.
So, yeah,
Yeah, like I said, because impact doesn't have any bearing on the actual quality of the film, but I
absolutely
do
not.
think it's an interesting thing to look at, and I
It's
think
more
that
of a
our show likes to.
correlation. Sometimes bad
Yeah,
movies can have a great impact, looking at you, the room, but sometimes bad movies can have absolutely zero impact. And it's definitely a correlation, not a showing of whether the movie is good or bad.
yeah. It's just we like to put things in
We
context
do.
on our show, and I
Man, I
think
love
that
me some
it's yeah.
context.
I love context too. That's I'm all about context,
All about
so
that context.
that's why it's the show's rating and not my rating.
Exactly.
And yeah, so that's it
I don't
for
need,
our
I
conversation
know
on
I
the
was
Night of
going
the
to talk
Hunter.
about it, but I actually still have no idea what I would give it because of the fact that it's it's so recent that I've seen something like this.
Yeah,
Obviously, Margaret and Untouchables are the same for me, but I feel much more that I know those movies a little bit better because of the context surrounding it. Because I've only seen a
yes.
handful of 50s movies, so I don't know how to compare it to its contemporaries.
Right.
So,
I'm a little bit in that same boat. I'm trying, like I said, I'm trying to expand, and I'm sure I've
yep,
seen a handful more than you have from that area just because of the volume of films that I
almost
consume
certainly. You
and
also studied
my
film.
classes. Yeah,
Yeah.
my classes on it. So, but
If there was a film about paper writing, man, I got you there.
oh man.
I've got novels that I wrote in college, essentially. Uh, I mean, none of them are
So,
good, but they're there.
right.
What are we
So getting
watching next,
into
Mikiah?
yeah, so getting into what our next one is, you actually brought up me picking a Sam Raimi movie.
Oh no. Are we?
And so here I am doing just that, but it's not the one that you think.
Oh no. I knew it wasn't going to be that one. You wouldn't want me to tear apart that one.
I am bringing up one that I don't think you have seen,
I've only seen
which
a handful
is,
of his movies, so yeah.
I mean, he doesn't have that many, but
Well, he
I
started in
don't
the
think you've
90s, so yeah.
seen, yeah, I don't think you've seen Dark Man
I have not.
with Liam Neeson. This is one of my favorites. I love this movie, and I absolutely know that you will have qualms with it because it is a goofy kind of campy movie, and I think it'll be an interesting one to talk about with you.
Okay.
So But if any movie's ever been up my alley more, or I don't think any movie's ever really been up my alley more than this one. Like, I watched it and I was like, this is my jam. This is what I like. So, yeah, that will be our movie for next week. Sam Raimi's 1990 film, Dark Man.
Okay.
And that'll do it for this week on Great American Movie Review. Be sure to join us every week on Thursdays for new episodes.